I think you just have to really define what their role is going to be. And so it's clear to everybody involved what their role should be. And we help them stay in their lane to make it a positive experience for everybody.
No agency buys a book of business to run it into the ground and fire everybody that helped to make it successful.
You really have to have that conversation. Do you want to be an employee? Well, you could stay on for a few years. Well, there's a big difference between staying on and being an employee. All right, we're here in a blog banter here with everybody, which is very rare. I guess Monday morning blog banters are the way to go. So I'm joined this morning by Therese Potter, Stephen Harrington Dakota, and Bobby Fernandez. And we're here to talk a little bit about if you're buying an agency, the pros and cons of keeping that agency owner on the team. And why don't we start with the pros? Because in my humble opinion, there might be far fewer pros than cons. Maybe that's just because I don't see it go well very often. And by well, I mean it goes fine. The agency that purchased it always makes money, but I see there's a lot of back and forth. So I'll start with my one pro I think of. I think a pro keeping them on is obviously they have some leadership ability with their current staff, if there's staff there, which again can also end up in the con category, which we'll get to in a moment. But it is nice to have an extra set of hands through that transition. If they have the right mindset, and that's the key, is the right mindset of let's build trust with this new team that we have. We have more resources. If they're there communicating and kind of, I hate to use the word selling, but really kind of being a spokesperson, a brand ambassador, and saying, here's all the good stuff, guys. Don't think about the fact that you used to have Martin Luther King Day off and now you don't. Think about the fact that your health insurance is way better. They can kind of counterbalance those pros and cons where staff kind of always thinks about the negative. And so, Bobby, I'll go to you next. And I know your experience, you dealt with a whole company that would just buy agencies and put them onto their model. So what do you see as some pros maybe?
I think when you bring on a current agency owners, they know the legacy of the agency. So they're kind of the historian of what happened here, or why did we do this thing, or why did we make this decision? Because sometimes we need to know. There's a lot of things when we're acquiring an agency that, might have happened in the past that we're a little bit confused about, or why that decision was made. And that prior agency principal has that history in their back pocket, and they can just pull those things out rather quickly.
How about you, Stephen?
I think that a lot of times agency owners were once producers, so they love the hustle, they love the sale, and maybe just the business part of what was happening wasn't the best thing for them. So they have a lot of great relationships or community involvement. They bring the transition of the relationship from them to the new owner or agency. So a lot of times they think they're still hungry to hustle and still want to go back to I just want to sell again. That was such a wonderful thing. I remember that. And I think that you get a lot of, it makes it an easier transition when the owner stays on sometimes because of those relationships. They can go all around town telling everybody how wonderful it is and how great the new people are, and really have it almost like a PR moment where they get to say how excited they are for selling the agency and assure people that everything's still a great fit.
And Therese, any pros that you can think of?
I think the same thing you guys said. I think the relationship they have with their staff is they have a good relationship. That's helpful because they need to have that positive attitude to basically project that the purchase of the agency is a positive thing, and just push that onto the staff and the employees that they have that connection with to make it a positive experience.
So another thing that I feel like is an opportunity is the fact that they know a lot of the customers, right? So for retention, that's also a huge benefit of being able to reach out and introduce new team members, because I think that's always the fear. You buy a book of business and our initial thoughts are always well, who's going to leave, right? So if they can stay on and maybe introduce a new producer, introduce a new account manager, kind of go through some of those, maybe there's new markets that can get developed. I think if they remain on as sort of the for renewal help on the largest accounts to make an effective transfer over maybe a year or two, that's really beneficial.
Well, and they could end up being an ambassador to the customer. I've been at agencies where they don't even tell the customer, and the customer will receive the information with the new name on it. And they're like, what the heck is this? So I think if they can be ambassadors to their customers for that connection as well, like you mentioned.
Absolutely. Some other pros I think that there is if there are some new markets that you're getting through the acquisition, is helping kind of coach and train, like, hey, here's the appetite, here's what they're good at, getting the marketing rep, building those underwriting relationships and kind of transferring that over if, as long as you're keeping that company. I think that that's another big one. And then also too, community contacts. Like a lot of times these agency owners are business owners. To Stephen's point, they love to produce. They like to be out and about. Like there could be a ton of contacts that you just want to say, hey, well, I sold my agency. You should call them, right? You want to kind of figure out a way where maybe there's some motivation for them to push those contacts on over to you as well. So any other pros we can think of?
I think it's just like a lot of times it's just good optically, like, oh, they're staying here, everything's good. Again, it goes back to that whole just smooth transition. I think you just have to really define what their role is going to be. And so it's clear to everybody involved what their role should be. And we help them stay in their lane to make it a positive experience for everybody.
Yeah. So now let's go on to the deep, dark, nasty side. So
nasty. It doesn't have to be nasty.
It doesn't have to be. And there's a lot of agency owners, I think, that actually just want to depart. Like I can tell you flat out, it would be a big struggle. I sold one of my companies and they wanted me to stay on, and I had a manager and I wasn't calling the shots and all new processes and new systems. I think when it gets to that time, I probably would be a little bit like, I'm okay. And I think some of them do it because they're not really sure what to do with themselves, right? And maybe they don't have hobbies. And so they're not really ready to stop working. This is also usually for agents, it's a huge part of their identity, right? Like I'm a business owner and I own this agency and I take care of my customers, and they've been to their houses when the house burns down and the trees on the sidewalk, And so I think like it's really weird to think about one day you're this and the next day you're not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people when they retire, it's like, I'm all set with any more Zoom meetings now. Like I'm crispy, I'm done. But as an owner, you get to kind of call the shots. So it's different, if that makes sense. I think some of the reasons why people stay on is they don't know what to do. They're looking for a transitionary period. They're frustrated, but they still like insurance, right? But the whole running the business, the accounting and the staffing and the technology is not their jam. So then they kind of come together and now we're here. And they're, you got to remember when you're buying a book of business or an agency, you're in a sales process. Sales process says, oh, we do that. We already have that. We have a processing team. We have a full-time accounting person. You don't have to do accounting anymore. Don't worry about commission. And it sounds so glamorous. You're like, this is perfect. I'm going to make X. I can stay on for a couple years, like dream come true.
Mm.
And then the sale happens, the money clears. Inevitably, everybody either thinks they overpaid or got underpaid, because that's the definition of a great deal is the person who bought it thinks they overpaid. The person who sold it thinks they got underpaid. And that's how you know you had the right deal, right? So tell me a little bit, like, Bobby, from your experience, because obviously you saw this a lot, like, what does those initial feelings look like, right? From staff, from the agency owner?
Yeah, I think that it all boils down to having a really great plan and communicating that plan initially upfront. And I think a lot of times, whether we hear those things or whether those things are not communicated during that process, we're not one to make that judgment, but usually once all the dust settles, people don't feel like there's been total transparency, or they don't feel like they've been shared with enough. So what I'll say is, if we have a plan and we feel like we've communicated the plan, communicate the plan again. Communicate the plan again to the agency principal, communicate the plan again to the staff. They feel they're worried that they're going to lose their job. The staff is worried that they're going to lose their job, which I always remind them, no agency buys a book of business to run it into the ground and fire everybody that helped to make it successful. No. So there's that. And then with the agency principals, we need to be really clear about this is the technology that we're going to adopt. This is exactly what we're going to expect from you during this process, where you need to be. And to Stephen's point, coach them how to stay in that lane and what that lane looks like. Because to them, their lane was wide open.
Well, they need
And
a
so
lot
they
of times.
need to know how to taper it back.
A lot of times people own agencies because they like to be in control. Like they're driven, they want to be in control, they don't like answering to somebody else. So they're like, well, I'll just start my own agency then. And it gets to a size and they either don't know what to do with it, or they're like, I can make some money right quick, but I still want a paycheck. And then they're like, now I'm back working for the man. Now what am I supposed to do? I don't like this. They're telling me what to do. This is how I would do it.
Well, and that kind of breaks us off to clear job descriptions and roles, because usually, and some agencies have family members that work at the agencies too. So you not only have the owner who is in control and the CEO, but then you have the siblings or you have the children, and they've talked about what's happening with this sale, but sometimes it's not clear to each one of them what their role becomes. And sometimes there's somebody that's a new company that comes in and purchases that they don't want to be involved in that purchase. Like somebody who works, my previous boss, he wanted to stay on. He was 78 and wanted to stay on and did a lot of stuff in the background. But when the big company came in and purchased, so he's getting paid by the owner separately and not under the big group that purchased it. So it's really confusing because his role kind of faded and he kind of would do stuff in the background, but it was just a weird, awkward situation. So I think there has to be clear descriptions and roles and include everybody, because he kind of felt left out. And at 78, he's such an awesome person and good with stuff. And he also would be good for him to retire, but he gets kind of lost in the shuffle. So you have to be careful with, staff, what their role is, and getting lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I also think too, a lot of these agency owners have been business owners for several decades, right? So it's either that or they've only worked for family previously. And most of the time they're getting acquired by a larger entity, right? So larger organizations have more processes, more technology, more, standards. And so, what you used to do for Jimmy's son and, run their credit card because you saved it on a Post-it note at a bigger agency is not going to fly for obviously cybersecurity. You're like, well, it's Jimmy's son. Well, but now you're with XYZ agency. And so the reason why sometimes I think I advocate not to have people kind of stay inside in the agency is if they don't have a good amount of emotional intelligence, that spills over to the team that you just acquired, right? Like, well, now we can't do this for Jimmy's son because they say that they can't, but they don't know Jimmy's son. Why is that such a big deal? Well, if everybody on the team did that once a week for Jimmy's son, we'd have a huge deal on our hands, right? I think that, they have not been on the other side for so long. It's a big transition. And not always one that I think people can do well. I think you really have to have that conversation. Do you want to be an employee? Not like, and I think the buyers sugarcoat it, right? Like, well, you could stay on for a few years. Well, there's a big difference between staying on and being an employee. And then who do they report to? We're very clear on like, what's their job description? Who do they report to? And we have an agency right now in a situation where the person that the agency owner report to is a lot younger. It's like, well, what does she know about my book of business? It's like, well, she's the operations manager. And so there is a hierarchy and protocol.
And we need structure and processes and procedures. And, if it's structured and you've got good processes and procedures and you relay those over to, the company that's being purchased, which is not so easy. Like Bobby mentioned about the technology, the bigger company that's purchasing usually has their set technology. The smaller one has some, but not all of it. So it's integrating technology, and it could be a pro that you're getting all this great extra technology, but it can also be a con because the smaller agency doesn't want to adapt and use the newer technology because you have all those staff members that have been there for a really long time and they do it a certain way, and getting them to change can be difficult. So attitudes are very important, having a positive attitude and getting them to see the light at the end of the tunnel with that better technology. Because usually, if we don't keep up with that technology and move forward in this industry, we get lost, like not going paperless. I had an agency that I worked for that did not want to go paperless. They wanted to keep all their paper files. And another one who bought 5 or 6 different agencies and had 5 different sections of file cabinets around the office. And they were all separate. So this is this agency we purchased 5 years ago. This is this agency we purchased 10 years ago. And it was like, what are you guys doing? How are you finding anything? And I was chalked with organizing that. And then the agency, that particular location moved. So you had to move. You have to figure out, where are we moving all these 5 sections of file cabinets? So it can be a lot of work.
Well, and I think, during acquisition and merger, we have to think about, we do a lot of talk around finances, right? There's all this due diligence that goes into, is our book profitable, loss histories, these kinds of things. But we skate over sometimes the roles and responsibilities, where maybe we need to treat it a little bit more like marriage counseling, where, this is going to be the real expectation. When the rubber meets the road, what is everybody's job going to look like? And setting that up ahead of time, and that selling principle needs to understand that part of their role and responsibility is to become the cheerleader of the new organization, whether you support that or whether you don't support that. But that was ultimately the decision that you made. And so now your role as a leader is to always be a cheerleader, but keep your private gripes private.
What I've seen happen a few times in agencies as well is the owner stays on. They think they're just going to sell and kind of like just right off into the sunset and kind of work what I want. But like we've already addressed, they don't like the new system, or they don't want to learn the new system.
Yeah.
They don't like the limits or the standards that are set forth by the new agency, or the accountability of, that's great, you went and got all this crap on a napkin that nobody can do anything with, but the whole new team is not your assistant to take care of this. Like if you stayed on as a producer, we're going to treat you like every other producer. So those clearly, really setting those expectations at the beginning. And I think it's almost more harmful sometimes when the owner stays on and then you have to let them go because it wasn't working out. So the rest of the team's like, whoa, the owner just got let go. So you have to change the way that looks and be like, oh, we're going to make it a very positive thing. So-and-so decided they're going to retire or whatever that is. And the whole team in the background is still like, but he wasn't doing what we were supposed to be doing. Do you think he really retired? And so then you have to do all this damage control because we didn't set a clear expectation, or the other person was wearing the rose-colored glasses like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get all the money from this sale and still get a paycheck. I think get to do only what I love.
No, I agree with that. And then I'll couple it with the other idea. I think sometimes the buyers don't want to have that conversation because I think it might ruin the sale, right? Like if there's competing offers on the table and one of them is I can stay on for 3 years with X paycheck, and yours is, yeah, hi, I'd like you to go. That can get tough.
Well, and we need to be aligned in our values. It's just like when we identify our target customer, right? We need to be identifying agencies that are aligned with our values and our vision and that we can get there with, because otherwise it's going to be a really painful process for everyone.
You have vision and values, right?
Right. Well, I was going to say, I think it comes back to almost doing like if you're comfortable with doing an assessment of what you're purchasing and deciding what really needs to stay or needs to go as part of it, and having that open conversation with the owner up front. And if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. Like I've seen so many agencies that are like, but they wanted to sell and I bought it and look, I just grew. And I'm like, yeah, now you have a huge pile of caca that you get to figure out what to do with. And it's going to cause you 10 times more stress than if we would have just hired a producer and held them accountable. Right. But so sometimes we get so excited that like, somebody wanted to sell to me that, I mean, and I hear all the time, especially from smaller agents, they want to grow and they're hungry, and I totally get it, but they're not looking at the long-term range or the big picture. They're just like, but they liked me, so we're going to get married now. Like we went on the first date.
The deal's been going on for so long.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, I'm going to, like it's been 2-3 years of back and forth, and finally the deal gets executed and everybody's just ready to move on with their lives and go be happy and healthy and just get the deal done. Or, the art of the deal, right, is that they've spent so much time negotiating, and now it's like, I'll just give in on this one thing. It's very difficult, I think, to lose money on an agency that you acquire, but you will lose sleep, hair, people, patience,
peace.
Yeah, peace. And so you have to just go into it eyes wide open. And I think like I think everyone's so polite, like they all moved in together. So everyone's polite. And then after a couple months, that burns off to like just pure and utter frustration. For some of the sellers, they might regret the sale, right? But the sale's done and there is no going backwards. And you've taken off the pain point of payroll and accounting and some of these other things. So they forget how hard those things are. Now they just focus on today of what's potentially kind of, stuck on them. I'll leave everybody with this. I think if you're in the buying mode of agencies and you're buying and you're on the larger side, it's really important to have the clarity and experience. If you're on the selling side and you're selling to a larger person, I think you have to look and be like, well, they did get larger. They have all these resources. How did they get there? Maybe I need to keep a more open mind about their procedures and their ways of doing things, and not just assume the way I've done it for 20, 30 years is the only way to run an agency. I kind of always giggle a little bit because there is so many ways to run an agency. I think it's the same thing with staff, right? Like, well, they know our carriers and they know our system. It's going to be plug and play. I'm like, that's cute. Like, it depends on how much they're using the system or what their processes and procedures were. Like, it's great that they have these carriers, but what's the agency standards? Like, yes, it's a leg up, but it's almost easier, I think, sometimes to take someone with a license that doesn't know all that stuff because everything's new and then they can just learn how to do it your way, but they have the insurance experience versus like, well, at the last agency I was at, we did it this way.
Yeah.
You don't sign your paycheck anymore. So we need you to do it this way. So any final words?
I think just communication. There cannot be enough communication, and then have an open feedback loop during the process, right? I think that is it's going to be really imperative to help the staff become acclimated because they will have a sense of loyalty to their prior owner. And so you need to provide them a feedback loop in the new organization and give them some place to go to talk and understand. And we may not be able to solve all of their problems, but a lot of times they just need to feel heard and understood and know that we're working on a plan.
Love it. Stephen, final words?
Clarity is kind, set standards, and hold accountable.
How about you, Therese?
I think they just need to show appreciation. It's not an easy task getting through these purchases and buyouts. So I think they underestimate the stress it puts on staff. So I think they need to be appreciative and incentives when their staff does something. I mean, because usually they're changing management systems and some of them have spent years building and getting acclimated to a management system, and then they're switching a management system. So it's not easy. It's stressful. And I think they need to be appreciative and give incentives to those staff members that, are really trying and showing a positive attitude and doing a good job at the changes.
I like it. So everybody, think about what you want to do, keeping those agency owners on or departing, but we will sign off and let everybody have a great day. Bye.
Bye.